What if the reason you cannot stop thinking about food at night has absolutely nothing to do with your willpower or your discipline? What if the brain fog you wake up with, the cravings that hit you out of nowhere, the moods that crash for no clear reason, none of that is your fault, not as an excuse, as a biological, scientifically documented, peer-reviewed fact that most people will never hear from their doctor. Right now, something inside your body is actively sending signals straight to your brain, signals that are shaping your hunger, hijacking your motivation, and quietly altering your mood every single day. It is not a virus, it is not a medication side effect, it is not something you caught or inherited from someone else. It is your belly fat, and before you assume you already know where this is going, I need you to stay with me here. What modern science has uncovered about belly fat in the last decade goes so far beyond eat less and move more that it is almost unrecognizable. We were told fat was storage, dead weight, a passive blob sitting in your stomach because you ate too much and moved too little. That is not just incomplete, that is wrong in a way that has caused enormous suffering for millions of people blaming themselves their entire adult lives. Here is the truth, your belly fat is a biologically active tissue. It has its own blood supply, it produces its own hormones, it communicates directly with your brain, and when there is too much of it, it starts sending the wrong messages to every system in your body. Loud, relentless, chemically powerful messages that override your conscious decisions about food, your emotional stability, and even your brain structure itself. This is not metaphor. This is not a theory. This is what the current research is showing, and it changes everything you think you know. Once you understand what is actually happening inside your body, the failed diets start to make sense. The cravings you could not explain start to make sense. The brain fog, the low moods, the anxiety that came from nowhere. It all starts to look less like a character flaw and more like biology. That is what this conversation is really about. Not weight loss, not calories. Understanding what this fat organ is doing and how to turn it down. In 1994, a researcher named Jeffrey Friedman at Rockefeller University made a discovery that completely broke the existing model of obesity science forever. He found that fat cells make a hormone, a real functioning hormone. The same category as insulin, cortisol, estrogen, and testosterone. These were not passive storage cells sitting around waiting to be burned. They were chemically active, producing signals and sending them directly into the bloodstream. They named this hormone leptin, from the Greek word meaning thin, and the moment it was discovered, fat stopped being storage and became a gland. Since then, researchers have identified dozens of chemical messengers produced by fat tissue. They are called adipokines, and the list keeps growing every year. Adiponectin, resistin, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, interleukin-1 beta. Each molecule travels through the bloodstream and reaches different organs throughout the body. Your liver, your muscles, your immune system, your pancreas, and yes, your brain. Every single one of these receives signals directly from your fat tissue. This is why medical literature now formally classifies adipose tissue as an endocrine organ. Same category as your thyroid, same as your adrenal glands. Your fat tissue is a functioning part of your hormonal system with real influence over your metabolism, your hunger, your immune response, and your mood. The fat you have been trying to shrink for years has not been sitting there passively. It has been active every single day, producing signals and making decisions. And when there is too much of it, those signals start going very wrong in ways that affect every part of your life. Now, here is something most people do not know, and it matters far more than the number sitting on your bathroom scale each morning. Not all body fat is the same. There are two completely different types, and their effects on your health and brain could not be more different. The first type is subcutaneous fat. This is the soft, pinchable fat sitting just underneath your skin that you can grab with your hand. When you grab your stomach, that is mostly subcutaneous fat. It shows in the mirror, it drives insecurity, but biologically it is relatively calm. Subcutaneous fat does not aggressively interfere with your hormones. It is not the primary driver of inflammation. It is not the villain in this story. The second type is the villain. It is called visceral fat, and it does not sit under your skin where you can see or feel it. It lives deep inside your abdominal cavity, packed tightly around your vital organs. Your liver, your intestines, your pancreas, the vessels feeding your heart. You cannot pinch it, you cannot see it, you cannot feel it. And here is what makes it genuinely dangerous beyond anything you might expect. You can have a completely normal body weight, a perfectly normal BMI, and still be carrying a significant and harmful amount of visceral fat inside. There is actually a term for this. TOFF, FI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. These people look healthy from the outside but are metabolically in trouble. They would never be flagged by a standard medical screening. A doctor might tell them their weight is fine, but inside, this organ is in crisis because when visceral fat accumulates beyond a certain threshold, it stops behaving like quiet storage and starts behaving like a wounded, screaming organ. It becomes inflamed, it becomes chemically reactive, and it begins broadcasting distress signals into your bloodstream that reach every system in your body, including your brain. A 2024 study followed over 10,000 people ranging in age from 18 to 90 years old using full body and brain MRI scans. The researchers found that people aged 20 to 39 with high visceral fat had nearly 6 times the risk of brain atrophy compared to peers with normal levels. 6 times. In people in their 20s and 30s, decades before anyone would normally start thinking about cognitive decline or memory problems or brain health. That is not a warning about aging. That is a warning about what is happening right now in young bodies that look completely fine from the outside. The hidden organ inside the abdomen is actively shrinking the most important organ in the skull, and almost nobody is talking about this publicly. Now here is how this actually happens, because the mechanism is genuinely remarkable, and understanding it will change how you see your cravings and your mood. When visceral fat becomes excessive, the fat cells begin to physically swell. They grow large enough that they outpace their own blood supply and oxygen delivery. Parts of the fat tissue become oxygen deprived. Fat cells under that kind of pressure and stress begin to die, and when they die, they release distress signals. A chemical SOS call goes out to the immune system. Come here, something is wrong, investigate this, and the immune system responds exactly as it is designed to. In a lean, healthy person, immune cells make up roughly 5% of the total cells inside fat tissue, a small, manageable housekeeping operation. In a person with significant visceral fat accumulation, that number climbs to as high as 40% of the total cell count inside that tissue. Nearly half of the fat tissue is now made up of inflammatory immune cells that arrive to clean up a crisis that never fully resolves. Because the fat keeps swelling, more cells keep dying, more distress signals keep firing, and those immune cells just stay there, permanently activated, permanently releasing inflammatory molecules, year after year, quietly, without dramatic symptoms, just a slow, steady flood of inflammatory chemistry leaking continuously into your bloodstream and reaching your brain. In 2020, scientists at the Medical College of Georgia published research in the Journal of Clinical Investigation that traced exactly how this reaches the brain. One specific molecule called interleukin-1 beta leaks out of visceral fat, enters the bloodstream, and activates the brain's own resident immune cells directly. Once those brain immune cells are switched on by this signal, they attack the brain's learning and memory center, which is called the hippocampus. The researchers confirmed this was causation, not just correlation, by transplanting visceral fat from obese mice directly into lean mice. The lean mice developed cognitive problems. Then they repeated the experiment using fat from obese mice genetically modified to not produce interleukin-1 beta. The lean mice remained completely fine. No cognitive problems. The fat itself was transmitting cognitive decline. Not the weight, not the calories. The fat tissue through its inflammatory output was reaching inside the brain, causing harm. Which means the belly fat you are carrying right now may be producing an inflammatory environment inside your skull without any obvious warning signs at all. Now let us come back to leptin, because this is where everything you have ever experienced around food begins making a completely different kind of sense. Leptin's job is to tell your brain how much energy you have stored. When leptin is high, the brain should say we are full, stop eating, slow down. When leptin drops, the brain says energy is running low, find food now, make eating a priority. That is the designed system working the way it was built. So logically, more fat should mean more leptin should mean less hunger. The heavier you are, the less hungry you should feel. But the opposite happens. In people with significant visceral fat, the brain stops being able to hear leptin at all. The fat cells are producing it at full screaming volume. But the brain's leptin receptors have become desensitized. The signal is being sent loudly and consistently, and the brain simply is not receiving any of it. This is called leptin resistance. And research from the lab that originally discovered leptin estimates that around 90% of obesity cases involve some degree of it. 90%. These are not weak people. These are not undisciplined people. These are people whose brains have been chemically cut off from the fullness signal. They eat a full meal, and 20 minutes later they are already thinking about food again. Not because they are greedy, because their brain believes they are starving. And the inflammation from visceral fat does not stop there. It also disrupts insulin signaling, destabilizes blood sugar, elevates cortisol, and drives even more visceral fat storage. It is a loop. Each component feeds the others. Each one makes the rest worse. And nobody told these people the loop even existed inside them. For decades, the message to people trapped in this loop was brutally simple. Try harder, eat less, have more willpower, stop making excuses, do better. We were wrong, completely and demonstrably wrong. These people were not failing at discipline. They were fighting a broken biological signal nobody told them existed. If you have ever sat with yourself after a night of eating you could not control and felt genuinely confused about why it happened, that confusion was valid. You were watching a hijacked system behave exactly as a hijacked system behaves. That is not weakness. That is biology overpowering conscious intention every single time. A few years ago, a specific phrase started spreading among people taking the new generation of weight loss medications. They used it with astonished relief every time. They called it food noise. And when you hear that phrase, you either immediately know exactly what it means or you have never experienced it personally. Food noise is the constant background hum about food that runs through your head throughout the entire day without ever fully stopping or going quiet. It is thinking about lunch while you are still eating breakfast. It is standing in front of an open cabinet with no memory of walking to the kitchen. It is trying to focus on something important while a separate track in your brain quietly runs through the fridge contents and calculates what is left from dinner. It is wanting something sweet, salty, crunchy, or just anything at 10 at night even though dinner was only 3 hours ago and you are not truly hungry. For a long time this was classified as behavioral, a bad habit, something you could interrupt with the right mindset, the right strategies, enough willpower and discipline. Therapists addressed it, diet programs addressed it, coaches addressed it, and for some people sometimes those things helped, but for many people they did not help at all. Those people were left concluding the problem was them, that they did not want it badly enough, that they lacked some fundamental quality others had naturally. Now we know food noise is neurological. It is not a habit. It is not a mindset problem. It is a brain chemistry problem driven by inflammation and disrupted signaling. Functional MRI studies have shown that in people with obesity, the brain's reward circuitry activates far more aggressively to food cues than it does in lean people. The same image of food, two different brains. In the lean brain, a moderate response. In the inflamed brain, the reward center fires like a fire alarm. Researchers have directly connected that overactive reward response to visceral fat and the inflammatory signals it continuously produces throughout the body and brain. The more systemically inflamed the body is, the more disruption occurs in the dopamine pathways of the brain's reward center, the louder the food noise becomes. This is why conventional dieting fails so consistently long term. Dieting asks the conscious brain to override a system running 10 levels below conscious thought entirely. It is like trying to win a shouting match against someone with a megaphone wired directly inside your skull. The conscious mind simply cannot win that fight reliably. The noise is not a choice you are making, but understanding where it comes from is the first step toward actually turning the volume down for good. There is one more layer that needs to be addressed clearly because it affects not just how you feel about food, but how you feel about everything in life. A 2021 meta-analysis pooled data from over 3,600 people across multiple independent studies looking at the relationship between body composition and mental health outcomes. The finding was consistent across every measure used. People with depression carried significantly more visceral fat than people without depression, regardless of age or sex. A separate study of 409 middle-aged women found a strong correlation between depressive symptoms and deep abdominal fat specifically, not subcutaneous fat. The depression tracked with visceral fat, not with overall body weight. It was not about being overweight, it was about where exactly the fat was sitting. Further research confirmed that visceral fat accumulation amplifies the incidence of both depression and anxiety through the same mechanisms we have been discussing throughout this conversation. Chronic low-grade inflammation, leptin resistance, insulin resistance, cortisol dysregulation, all of it leaking continuously from fat tissue into the bloodstream, bathing the brain daily. Think about what this means practically. The version of you that feels low and heavy for no reason you can clearly identify or explain to anyone else. The version that is more anxious in situations you used to handle easily. The version that has quietly lost interest in things that used to genuinely light you up. That version of you may not be who you actually are. That version may be your biology under chemical attack from an organ that grew too loud. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally anxious or unmotivated as a person. You are inflamed, and being inflamed is not the same thing as being broken. One of those is permanent. The other one is not, and that difference matters more than almost anything else I could tell you today. Here is where the story finally turns. In 2026, a research team led by Professor Iris Shea at Ben-Gurion University in collaboration with Harvard published remarkable findings. They followed 533 adults with an average age of 61 for up to 16 years using repeated MRI scanning of both the brain and abdomen. People who lost visceral fat and kept it off showed significantly lower rates of brain shrinkage and meaningfully better memory scores well into their 60s and beyond. Not people who simply lost weight, not people who lowered BMI. Specifically, and only the people who reduced their deep abdominal visceral fat received the brain protection. Two people could lose the same number of pounds on a scale. Only the one who specifically reduced visceral fat got the cognitive benefit. The other did not. The protective effect was also independent of the APOE gene, which is the biggest known genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease currently identified by researchers. Even people carrying the genetic predisposition for dementia receive cognitive protection when they successfully and consistently reduce their visceral fat levels over time. The damage is not permanent. The brain shrinkage, the inflammation, the leptin resistance, the food noise, the mood disruption, none of it is locked in forever. The fat organ can return to a healthy size. The inflammatory signals can quiet. The satiety receptors can begin working again. The fog can actually lift. You were not stuck. You were operating without the information you needed. And the moment that changes, everything else becomes possible in a way it was not before. The interventions that consistently reduce visceral fat are not glamorous. They are not a new supplement or a biohacking protocol. They are the fundamentals done consistently over time. Sleep is the most underestimated tool available to you. When you are sleep deprived, cortisol rises, insulin sensitivity drops, and your body stores preferentially as visceral fat. 7 to 9 hours in a cool, dark room without eating at least 3 hours before bed is one of the most powerful metabolic interventions you have available. Daily movement matters enormously. Not formal exercise alone, but simply moving throughout the day. Walking 7 to 10,000 steps has remarkably consistent research behind it. Resistance training at minimum twice per week builds muscle tissue that directly counters the metabolic effects of visceral fat and reduces systemic inflammatory markers measurably. Managing stress is not a soft suggestion. Cortisol is the hormone that directs your body to store energy as abdominal visceral fat specifically. This is physiology, not wellness talk. Reducing ultra-processed foods removes the thing that is actively jamming your biological fullness signals at the exact moment you need those signals working correctly. Of all the tools available, the one most directly addressing the hijacked satiety system is protein, not as a trend, as a biological intervention with a clear mechanism. When you eat sufficient protein, your gut releases a cascade of satiety hormones. GLP-1, peptide YY cholecystokinin. These are the exact pathways weight loss drugs are designed to mimic. Your gut already produces GLP-1 naturally. The pharmaceutical companies did not invent fullness. They copied a biological process your body already has and put it in an injection. You can activate that same pathway every single time you eat a high-protein meal. No prescription required, no injection, no side effects, just food working as biology intended. A 2020 meta-analysis confirmed it. When protein increased, hunger dropped, fullness rose, satisfaction improved, and the desire to eat again fell measurably and consistently across all studies. The simplest structural change with the most immediate impact is making protein the base of every meal. Aim for 30 grams at breakfast, lunch, and dinner consistently. Whole food sources are best. Quality meat including beef, lamb, and bison. Wild-caught fatty fish like salmon, sardines, and anchovies. Whole eggs with the yolk included. When you consistently hit your protein targets, the food noise gets quieter within days. Evening evening cravings lose their grip. Meals feel complete in a way they did not before. That is your satiety system beginning to function the way it was designed before. Inflammation and leptin resistance disrupted everything and left you fighting your own biology daily. The story told about fat, willpower, and discipline for decades has caused real harm. Psychological harm, moral harm. People were told the problem was their character. They were told they were lazy, undisciplined, that if they wanted it badly enough, they would find a way, that their struggle was a reflection of who they were. That narrative was not just incomplete, it was factually wrong in a way that caused people to carry enormous shame about a physiological condition they never asked for. Your belly fat is not a moral failing. It is not a sign of who you are. It is an organ that grew beyond its healthy size and started sending wrong signals. Like any organ under stress, it responded to the conditions it was placed in. When you change those conditions deliberately and consistently, the organ itself begins to change too. The brain shrinkage is not permanent. The leptin resistance is not permanent. The food noise is not permanent. The mood disruption is not permanent. None of it is. The fat organ making decisions on your behalf can shrink. The signals it sends can quiet. The brain it has been slowly affecting can begin to recover and heal. And when that happens, the version of you buried under years of chemical noise, clear-headed, energetic, calm around food, that version is still there waiting. You were never broken. You were never weak. You were never lacking. You were just fighting something nobody ever told you existed inside your own body. Now you know it exists. And now you can actually do something about it. That changes everything.